The nights in our building had become quieter than usual, almost too quiet, as if the silence itself was trying to remind me how alone I had begun to feel. My relationship had been slipping into a strange kind of distance, one that didn't arrive suddenly but settled slowly, like dust gathering in corners. My partner had grown busier, more distracted, always tired, always somewhere else in his mind even when he was right beside me. Conversations became shorter, messages became colder, and the warmth that once felt effortless now needed effort just to imagine. I told myself things would get better, but most nights I found myself staring at the ceiling, wondering why the loneliness felt heavier when someone was still technically in my life. I had started taking late-night walks downstairs just to clear my thoughts. That's how my small interactions with the watchman turned into something I looked forward to without admitting it to myself. He was older but gentle in a way that felt grounding. He didn't talk much unless spoken to, but every time I passed him, he greeted me with a nod and a quiet smile that somehow felt more sincere than anything I had received at home lately. Little gestures, offering an umbrella when it rained, asking if everything was okay when I looked upset, began to feel like rare moments of being seen. That evening, after another argument with my partner about something that didn't even matter, I walked downstairs with my mind spinning. I didn't want to cry in front of anyone, but my face must have shown enough. When the watchman saw me, he didn't ask many questions. He just studied me for a moment, his expression shifting with a kind of quiet concern I hadn't felt from anyone in weeks. The dim lights of the building's entrance gave a soft glow around him, making the night feel even more still. "You look troubled," he said softly. "Is everything all right?" It was such a simple question, but it cracked something inside me. I nodded at first, then shook my head without meaning to. That was enough for him to stand up from his small stool and gesture toward the side door that led to his room, the small, square room built into the corner of the compound for night shift workers. "If you want to sit for a moment," he said gently, "you can. You don't look like you want to go back upstairs yet." I froze. The invitation wasn't strange, but the timing made it feel heavier than it should have. My heart was beating too fast for a gesture that innocent. I knew walking into anyone's room in the middle of the night wasn't a simple act, especially with the way I'd been feeling lately. Especially when my relationship was hanging by threads. But I also knew I didn't want to go back upstairs, not to the silence, not to the coldness waiting for me. I hesitated long enough to feel guilty, but not long enough to stop myself. The quiet courtyard around us, the cool night air, the soft sound of insects from outside the gate, it all felt like the world was holding its breath with me. When he noticed my confusion, he stepped slightly back, leaving the door open just enough. "You don't have to," he said. "Only if you need a place to rest for a minute." His voice didn't push, it reassured. And that was all it took. I walked in. The room was small but warm. A dim bulb glowed above us, casting shadows that softened everything. There was a folded blanket on the bed, a small table with a metal kettle, and the faint smell of tea still in the air. It felt safe in a way I hadn't expected. He closed the door quietly, not fully, just enough to give privacy without shutting me away from the world. I sat on the chair near the bed while he made tea. Neither of us spoke for a while, and strangely, the silence didn't feel heavy here. It felt comforting. He finally asked, "Do you want to talk about it?" I didn't know where to begin, so I just breathed out everything I had been carrying, the loneliness, the arguments, the feeling of fading in my own home. He listened, really listened. No judgment, no interruptions, just quiet understanding. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like my words mattered to someone. Somewhere in the softness of that moment, I realized I had crossed a boundary simply by being there. And yet I didn't step back. I wasn't ready to leave. He poured the tea slowly, the steam rising between us like a thin veil, softening the quiet tension in the room. I watched his hands, steady and gentle, so different from the restless energy I had been living with at home. When he handed me the cup, his fingers brushed mine unintentionally. It was a fleeting touch, but it sent a warmth through me that had nothing to do with the drink. I wasn't supposed to feel that. I knew it, but the truth was that I had forgotten what genuine warmth felt like. He sat across from me on the edge of the small bed, keeping enough distance to show respect but close enough that I could sense his presence. It was strange how comforting another person's quiet could be, especially when my own home felt louder with emptiness than with sound. For a while, neither of us spoke. He waited patiently, letting me rest inside the silence instead of drowning in it. I sipped the tea, letting the calm settle around me. Then, gradually, the words started coming again, not because he asked, but because I needed someone to hear them. I don't know when it all changed, I said quietly. It's like one day we were fine, and then suddenly we were strangers living in the same space. He nodded, slow and thoughtful. Sometimes people forget to take care of the things they love. Not because they stop caring, but because they stop noticing the small things. His voice was soft enough to make the room feel smaller, warmer. I looked up at him, surprised by how accurately he captured the ache inside me. You've been hurting for a while, he added. Anyone can see that. The honesty in his tone made something inside me tremble. I wasn't used to someone paying attention. I wasn't used to anyone reading the pain I tried so hard to hide. My throat tightened as I whispered, "Why do you care?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he watched me with a kind of sincerity that made it hard to breathe. Then he said, "Because sometimes you look like you're carrying too much alone." It wasn't flirtation. It wasn't manipulation. It was kindness, simple, human, undeserved kindness. And that was what made it dangerous. I looked down at my hands, afraid that if I held his gaze any longer, I might say something I couldn't take back. The room felt different now, closer, heavier, filled with something unnamed but undeniable. I tried to ignore it, but my heart was beating too loudly inside my chest to pretend nothing was happening. When he shifted slightly closer, it wasn't bold or intrusive. It was slow, giving me all the space in the world to move away. I didn't. I stayed exactly where I was. You don't have to explain everything, he said. Just breathe. Rest for a moment. I should have stood up then. I should have thanked him and left. I should have remembered the promises I made, the relationship waiting upstairs, the partner who, despite everything, still expected loyalty. But my body didn't move. For the first time in months, someone's presence eased the tightness inside my chest. Someone looked at me like I mattered. Someone listened. He glanced at me again, his eyes softer now, almost hesitant. I don't want to cross a line, he murmured. Not unless you truly want to talk, or just not feel alone for a little while. His restraint made it harder, not easier. If he had tried to push, I would have walked away instantly. But the fact that he didn't made me feel safe in a way I couldn't explain. My hand was resting on the table beside the cup. His hand moved slightly, stopping halfway, giving me the choice. The moment stretched, long and fragile. I felt the weight of my loneliness, my confusion, my longing for connection, everything mixing into one overwhelming feeling that made it impossible to think clearly. Without fully meaning to, my fingers slipped closer to his. Not interlocked, not intentional, just close enough to feel the warmth of his skin. He inhaled softly, almost as if he wasn't expecting it. But he didn't move forward. He let me decide the distance. Let me choose where the boundary would lie. I didn't pull my hand back. Silence filled the room, and in that silence, something shifted. The air grew heavier, the night deeper, and my heart louder. I wasn't sure where the moment was leading, but I knew we had already stepped into a space that changed everything. And even though guilt tugged at me, the truth was simple. I didn't want to leave. When I finally stepped out of his room, the night felt different, colder, sharper, almost as if it had witnessed something I wasn't ready to admit. The air hit my face, a quiet reminder of the world waiting for me upstairs. For a few long seconds, I just stood there in the dim courtyard, feeling the weight of everything settle on my shoulders. Nothing dramatic had happened, no lines crossed in the way people usually imagine, yet something inside me had undeniably shifted. I had let myself feel something I wasn't supposed to feel. I had stayed when I should have walked away. By the time I reached my apartment door, my heartbeat still carried the echo of the quiet room downstairs. My partner was asleep on the couch, the TV still flickering faintly across his face. He looked tired, older, worn out in ways I hadn't noticed before. Maybe I hadn't been looking closely. Or maybe he hadn't been showing anything until now. I stood there for a moment, unsure whether guilt or sadness was hitting me harder. When he stirred and opened his eyes, I froze. His expression softened for a second before confusion replaced it. "You're back late," he murmured, his voice clogged with sleep. I forced a small nod and walked past him before he could ask anything else. He didn't know where I had been. He didn't know who I had been with. But he sensed something was off. I could feel his eyes following me, searching for the version of me he had started losing long before tonight. The next morning carried a fragile heaviness. My partner tried to act normal, making tea, asking routine questions, pretending yesterday's fight hadn't cut deeper than usual. I answered politely, quietly, avoiding his gaze. The guilt I expected didn't hit me in the way I thought it would. Instead, it came as confusion, a sharp, tangled kind that made me question everything. Was I wrong for wanting to feel heard? Or had I finally reached a limit I had ignored for too long? Later that night, when I went downstairs again, the watchman was at his usual spot. But the air between us felt different, careful. He didn't greet me the same way. He stood up slightly, nodded once, then sat back down as if afraid of doing too much. For a moment, I considered walking past him without stopping. Pretending nothing had changed. Pretending I hadn't spent half the night thinking about the warmth of his room, his quiet voice, the safety he offered without asking for anything in return. But I stopped. He looked up at me, worry flickering in his eyes. "Are you okay?" he asked. I nodded too fast, too automatically. He noticed. "You don't have to feel guilty," he said quietly. "You were hurting. You needed someone." His words shouldn't have comforted me, but they did. And that scared me more than anything. "I don't know what I'm doing," I confessed. It was the first honest thing I had said all day. "I feel lost." He didn't move closer. He didn't touch me. He didn't ask for anything. He simply said, "You don't owe me anything. Whatever happened last night, whatever it meant, that's your decision to understand, not mine to demand." That was the moment I realized the danger wasn't him, it was what I felt around him. The safety, the attention, the peace I had forgotten existed. I wasn't falling for him necessarily. I was falling for a version of myself I hadn't felt in a long time, one that felt valued. For days after that, I kept my distance. I tried talking to my partner, tried explaining the loneliness I had been carrying, tried to open a door that had been closed for too long. Sometimes he listened, sometimes he didn't. Effort started coming from both sides again, but it felt fragile, like a bridge rebuilt after a storm. Yet every time I crossed the courtyard, every time I passed the watchman's room, I felt the quiet reminder of a night that had changed me, emotionally, not physically, but deeply enough that pretending otherwise would be a lie. In the end, no dramatic choices were made. No sudden breakups, no confessions. Life simply continued, but not the same. I learned to speak up more. My partner learned to pay attention. And the watchman, he stayed in his place, offering the same gentle nods, the same quiet understanding, without ever crossing the line again. But some nights, when the building was silent and the lights dimmed just like they did that night, I would remember the warmth of his room, the honesty in his eyes, and the version of myself that had surfaced in that fragile moment. I didn't choose him, but I didn't forget him either.